I'm John Parker, president of SoCal 7x24 chapter. We have our first virtual organization meeting today. First of all, I would like to welcome our two sponsors. First, Silverback Data Solutions. They provide data center services you can trust. I would like to thank our second sponsor as well, Unirise. Unirise provides your cabling solutions for all your network and data center needs. Here is the recording from our panel discussion on June the 17th, 2020 on data center colocations.
So let's talk about, I think this is where it gets fun. I'm looking at the chat box. It is Gil's and my job as moderators to pull questions out of the chat box and pose them to our panelists. So as I introduce the panelists and myself, please start writing questions in the chat box, everybody. So who am I? Dave Eastman. I've been designing and managing IT white space and enterprise and colocation data centers around the globe for 20 years. 15 of those were with Broadcom. The past 6 years have been with the company Server Farm Real Estate, where I offer managed services to our clients. My specialty is data center infrastructure management, and I lead the team that offers those managed services to our co-location clients. But for today, I'm the panel moderator, together with Gil, who kicked off the whole session. Today's topic, co-location data centers. We will be taking questions just from the chat box, and the panelists will be responding. I will say that while the panels will be verbally responding to questions, feel free to add your own insights in the chat box in response to questions posed there. You should all see them all if you open your chat boxes. And so let's get started. Let me introduce the three panelists. John Robertson, Senior Data Center Manager. In a moment, he will give a little more of his background. And Al Nichols with Silverback Data Center Solutions. And John Parker, who just finished the presentation and has already been introduced. So John, if you will stop sharing, and let's start with John Robertson, panelist. Why don't you introduce yourself, John?
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is John Robertson, and I was with Blizzard Entertainment for 16 years, and I've been in IT for over 20 years total. While I was at Blizzard, I built out data centers all across the world. My job was to do all the site selection, design, build out, and then the ongoing operation of the data centers. That's what I was responsible for. I've literally been all over the world. I build out colos in all over the US, a couple different countries in EU, built a couple data centers in China, one in Taiwan, Korea, Australia. So literally all over the world. This is what I do, and it's what I love. I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully I can answer some people's questions and help you make some good, intelligent decisions for your business. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, John. Al Nichols.
Hi, well, first, John Parker, thanks for a great presentation, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I started in the data center business about 20 years ago. Founded a company providing services for data centers, and now our team is a part of Silverback Data Center Solutions. You may have seen their name as you were in the waiting room before the meeting. And we do 5 things primarily. We do over 100 data center migrations a year, so we've gotten pretty good at that over the years. We also do deployments where people aren't migrating, but just build outs within the white space. And we partnered with most of the major colos for years to help clients with them. We can't give the kind of advice that brokers give, but once they decide on where they're going, we can be very helpful with getting people there. We also help with staffing. We do provide smart hands for many clients that used to be able to go down the hall, and now they're in a colocation site. So it's a little more difficult, or maybe they need a quarter of a person instead of a whole person. We can also augment staffs. The fourth of the five things we do are audits and DSIM. Close to Dave, I've known Dave Eastman for years through DSIM, and we started that back in '02. We've done millions of square feet. They're very good at that. And then data center decommissioning, as people move out of the data center, obsolete materials, we're able to help that with them. And some of the new things, it's just for a company that's not, a megalith, it's just been really exciting for me that we've been able to participate in some of the cutting edge things. And we can, their technologies now can cool up to 200 kilowatts a cabinet. It's really been enjoyable being on the forefront of some of the change that's allowed people to be more efficient and get more done. And just very happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Al. Okay, and our third panelist is John Parker. So any questions for John rooted from his presentation, please enter them in the chat box. And we'll get started with the questions. Gil, do you have a question you want to tee up to any of the panelists?
Hey, Dave. Yes, actually we do. So we have a question regarding circuits. So what do you recommend regarding circuit size for each cabinet? Same circuit sizes in all racks, size circuits to fit the equipment, or going into the rack, or any other suggestions?
And
Well, I'll start. John Robertson's probably a better expert than me, and he and I have actually had a beer or two and talked about this at some of these meetings. I think it depends on what your data center needs and what you're needing currently and what you're needing in the future. But the most important thing is try to standardize if you can. To me, that's the key.
Anyone else in the panel?
oh,
Unmute John, Dave.
oh my goodness, how could he be muted?
We definitely want him to talk.
All
There you
right.
go, John.
Hey, thanks a lot, Dave. Yeah, so yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's one of the most important questions because power is the commodity and that's what you're going to pay for. So that's the most important thing, is to utilize your power as efficiently as you can. So first thing I did with my team is we had a bunch of design principles, and one of them is to design as dense as possible. So what that means is you want to fit as much as you can in that rack while still being able to have HA available if you lost one or two of your PDUs. So we even went in the weeds a little bit more, where we actually created standards. So our compute was all three-phase. Our networking gear was single-phase. Storage was triple, or some of our storage was single. But the bottom line is you have to come up with a standard. And we really liked the three-phase power because it is more efficient and we can get a lot more gear within the rack. Now, here's one thing that's going to throw a lot of people off is if you let's just say one of the major manufacturers for compute, you can actually run the numbers to see, whatever server you have, how much memory and CPU, and it'll tell you how much power. And you can pretty much build a chart which tells you, all right, here's how much power you're going to need. The problem, though, is in reality, you can use a heck of a lot more power than they're telling you. And the reason why they do it, it's a CYA. If you follow their guidelines, or if you don't follow their guidelines and you lose power or you have a problem, you can blame them. So it's always been this battle on what's actual amount you can hold or what the manufacturer tells you. And the best thing that we did was a proof of concept where we loaded it up, and then we literally, you know, in a non-production environment, and we literally pulled one of the PDUs. We ran a smoke test at the time so that the CPU and the memory was pegged, and we saw what it did. That way we knew and simulated a real life situation. And then that gives you the confidence going into production that you won't have an issue. So long-winded answer is we really preferred the triple phase because it used the power most efficiently, but you have to stack it up or else you're leaving money on the table. And where it kind of gets a little dicey is depends on the model, the charging model. Some models just gives you pay for how much power you use across the whole data center, where some charges you per circuit, whether you use 0% or 100% of that circuit. So
And I'd like to add one little quick thing, Dave. It's very important to know how much your colo provider allows per cabinet. For example, you don't want to get a 208 three-phase 60 amp circuits in your cabinets if you can only go up to 15 kW per cabinet. You're going to have more power in your PDUs than you're going to be allowed to put in your cabinet. So know what you can go up to when you go to that colo provider as well.
Yeah, John, the one thing that we do in the site selection process is I always ask what's the wattage per square foot that can be cooled. So the places that had 200, you know, you're looking at 5 to 7 kW, where, you know, some other places which could take the higher demand was up to 400 watts per square foot. So that's the key question that you ask before you actually select a site, so you know where you stand ahead of time.
Yeah, and you really want the flexibility with the provider. You want a provider who can take you up quite a ways. Whatever you need today, you don't know what your technology is going to look like 5 years from now, but you're probably going to need more. Density seemed to kind of stay static for a long time on average, but in the last few years, it actually is going up. And again, we've installed cabinets that cool up to 100 kilowatts. I mean, it's amazing. I didn't even know you could get that much heat in a cabinet. And now we're getting demand for some up to 200 kilowatts. So, boy, to be able to avoid rip and replace, if you've got and colos are so competitive now. They'll do about whatever you ask to get the business because you have so many options, and you really want to have some headroom and flexibility because you don't know what it's going to look like in a few years.
All right. Thank you, panelists. Let me ask a second question. How are Title 24 requirements addressed by colo companies? Applicable to cooling systems, T-24 calls for using airside economizers if refrigeration systems are used. Do you understand the question, and can you respond?
Well, personally, I don't have to deal with Title 24. If Greg Stover were on the call, if he was, he knows Title 24 inside and out. But John, I don't know if you or Al have any more information on Title 24.
I don't specifically on Title 24, but just in general, in terms of meeting regulatory requirements, unless you're huge, a colo is in so much better position to do it than an individual company because they're doing this over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of square feet, and they can put the resources against it to get ahead of that, I think, better than most individual companies can and more efficiently. And you know they're getting every question under the sun and requirement from their clients. So that's not a real question. But I think
here's a way to do this, and we've talked about this, is I think we've stumped the panel on this one, but we have many people online that can respond in our chat box to this question with answers.
Yeah, great idea.
All right.
All right, we should keep moving along. So we have another question. If a company has a co-located data center with one company and they want to build a second one what are the advantages and disadvantages of staying with the same colo provider versus going with a different one?
I'll take the first stab at that. So one of the advantages, especially if you have multiple locations, is you can use the economy of scale to save money. The more you're using, the better price that they will give you. The disadvantage of it is you're going to have to deal with possibly different cost models, different ways of engaging them, just a little bit different. At the end of the day, though, it's not really that big of a deal, but those are the ones that come to mind pretty quickly to me.
Yeah, let me mention one real quick too. I have a couple of colos and they're different colo providers, and I don't think that's a big deal. To add to what John said, as an example, my Pacific Northwest colo provider, in the 8 years I've been there, they've changed ownership 3 times. They were like banks were in the 90s with interstate banking. They keep getting bought out. So I don't know if it really matters other than your intersite connectivity. If you get a better deal by going through one colo provider at 4 sites around the US, around the world, than you do with independent sites. They'll tell you do, but the way everything's progressing, it's not as big of an advantage, I know.
And that last, one of those last things you said, John, I know that the connectivity, some of the large ones who have sites all over the place will really tout that. But I'd look at how big a part of my overall cost that is, and is that enough to really push the decision or not? And just in general, if you're competing with somebody, it tends to keep you on your toes more. You know, if you got several providers, I would think.
All right. Let's move to another question for the panel. And this is a very pertinent question. Has adopting to COVID-19 highlighted any weaknesses in companies' processes for managing their data centers in remote colocation sites? In other words, has COVID-19 made colocation more difficult or easier? Who wants to take a stab at that one?
I can to start with, and I'll even take it a step further than that. I'm attempting to move a colo of about 40 cabinets during COVID-19 in a couple of months. So it is harder, and John has a multitude of providers. I have several, and as I stated in my presentation, the way they manage their staff and the way they manage you and your third-party providers and vendors going into those colos at my sites are different. They're not tremendously different, but you may be able to stay in there only 2 hours at a time or 4 hours at a time, or maybe able to have only one person in there or 2 people in there at a time. And during these times, because one thing they both do, and I really like this during these times, is they limit the areas, or my providers do, limit the areas to where you can go. So for example, the full break room is not open. You just have, or you don't have access to the storage areas and things like that. You have access to your cage and the restroom, and that's about it, because they want to wipe down the areas where you were in contact with when you leave.
That's yeah, good points. Some other things we've seen across our customer or across our client base. I started my career at Frito-Lay many years ago, and we'd always test something, even if it made sense. Until you do it, you just don't know. And I think people's pandemic plans have been tested in that way. And one of the shortcomings we've seen that people adjusted to is in the beginning, they didn't have the smart hands available they needed to handle all the requirements. They were used to their people being able to go in, and was there a plan B if their people weren't able to go in? And then if you're a colo provider, depending on their capacity, if all your clients are having the same issue, some had things stacked up 2 or 3 days, that normally would have had a 1 hour, 2 hour SLA. So that was an issue, and it would have been nice to have other parties involved to have alternatives to get those handled. Most of those have worked through that at this point. A second thing that we've seen is kind of giving a plug to David here, but for the DSIM side of things, I think a lot of people thought, I really don't need DSIM, I got my data center under control. And once they couldn't get into it, they found some shortcomings where they really wish they'd had a DSIM product, operational, functional, and robust. And we're seeing a lot of interest from clients in, okay, I really need to do DSIM at this point. Before I thought it was a luxury, now I understand it's a necessity. And audits and and getting a product in place so you're not caught off guard if suddenly you can't get to your data center for some reason.
Yeah, I agree with Al. Your DSIM solution is literally your eyes and ears into your environment, and without it, you could be dead in the water. As far as the effect of COVID, one thing that I always did was hired third-party remote hands vendors for all of our data centers. It worked out cheaper, and most of the time I would get better response times as well. So what we're finding is that a lot of the providers wouldn't allow our remote hands vendors inside, so we had to use their own, local remote hands. So as Al said, first of all, the cost increased because I was getting a way better deal. But then on the other side is we had tons of delays because everybody there had to use their own, the local remote hands. So there was a queue. Luckily, we didn't have a really big problem, but there was definitely a lot of delays.
And maybe going forward with something like that in mind, you might want to look at, should you negotiate, hey, as long as my providers are following the same protocols, you'll agree to continue to allow them access or something like that.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Gil, do you have a question? If not, I have another one.
Go ahead. I think there was some clarification on the previous question.
Not per se.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead if you see one.
All right. So really a challenging one. What items do companies often miss in planning and executing a move to a colocation site? In other words, in a project plan, what tasks get overlooked with bad consequences?
I have some feedback on potential gotcha, which would be horrible, never happened. But part of selecting a colo is you want to know the shortest entry point if you want to move a rack into the data center, and what's the tallest rack that they can support. So for years, 42U was a standard, and some colos built only to accommodate up to 42U. So, when we modernized all of our policies, we went up to 48. And, there was one data center which we were thinking about moving out of, but they could only accommodate up to 42U. So if you think about it, that would be a huge catastrophe if you move in day, you're trying to move in 48U racks and they're all too tall. So that's a little gotcha that could happen.
The devil is in the details. The moves we've had, and these details vary so much from, I guess, company to company, but it's usually not your high level things. And I call that one of John's thing is the details, because I have to support 50 some offices around the world. And that's one of the things that always get us is, did we measure that elevator to see if that rack would fit in that elevator that needs to go up to the 3rd floor server room, as an example.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen that happen. There was a building where a window had to come off to be able to get something in because it wouldn't fit the elevator. We've had ones where elevators weren't functional, and fortunately unloaded racks. We've had to carry unloaded racks. There was another building where we had 6 to 60 Cisco 6500 switches, and those things aren't light. We had to carry them up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was not functional yet, but we had to make our SLA. Yeah, so definitely your pathway is very important. And what's your plan if something doesn't work? Actually, we had a project just yesterday where, in a colo, we were installing some cabinets, and their freight elevator didn't work. They had to delay it a day. Another one is John saying the devil in the details. I was going to use that line if he hadn't, because the little things can kill you. We've had clients that said that would would have their rack elevations agreed on, and then when you get there, say, actually, I want the switches at the middle of the rack instead of the bottom of the rack, or they change their architecture. Well, your patch cables may not make that length. There's a lot of planning, a lot of contingencies that go into it. Now, we do some things you can do some things to carry extra inventory with you, but last minute changes are not a good thing when you're, something's going to happen you don't expect, but you sure want to eliminate everything you can out of that. Some people also said, hey, I don't want to pay for patch cables. I want to use the ones I've got. Well, the amount of time it takes you to harvest those and identifying with the right service to get them back in the right place, it's cheaper to buy new ones, and you got the correct length, you got better patching. There are very few data centers we've walked into where somebody in the first minute or two doesn't say, I've got to apologize for this data center, but it's not my fault. My predecessor did it. And man, it's one time when you're doing a relocation that you can get everything to make it look the way you want to, make it as easy to manage going forward as possible. So boy, take advantage of it if you can. And I guess the last thing I'd say is DSIM, back to DSIM. If that's something you might deploy, anywhere between a quarter and a half the cost of deploying DSIM is services to get it up and running, to identify your cable mapping, exactly where your equipment is. Well, relocation, you've already done that. You know exactly where you're going to put it because you just put it there. So if you're going to deploy DSIM, man, that can be a great time to, basically you've gotten an audit as part of your move. Use that to drive efficiency in your DSIM deployment, if that's something that you're headed towards.
Well, we're nearing the end of our Q&A time, but let's follow on that last response with the following question. What are you looking for in a DSIM tool to allow the data center managers to manage their space, power, and cooling, if a DSIM tool, as you've said, is critical to success in a colocation? So what are the most important attributes of a DSIM tool to be successful in a colo?
Oh, I won't answer that one. I should ask that one myself. For me, it's been, president of organizations attending these meetings for 10, 12 years. I remember we had a DSIM Wars meeting one time with 3 DSIM providers. It's ease of use for the tool. And the data in the tool has to be up to date and accurate. That's why I like a managed service DSIM tool. It makes it a lot easier. What can be automated in that tool? And another example is, like John moves data centers and all so much. My DSIM tool, and you don't have to ask, I'll say it's in command, has a migration tool function. So I'm using that migration tool function right now to build out my new colo that's going to have those 50 racks in it. And when I move them in that migration tool from my data center, it keeps track. And it measures the power in the racks and everything for me, how many rack units I'm using, how many I have left and all. So it makes it very easy to move a data center. And like you said, for all the other reasons.
Very cool. John Robertson, you said it's critical to success in a colo. So what characteristics, attributes are critical?
All right, so number one is asset management. You know, especially when you're preparing for budgeting, it's easy to run a report rather than sending a whole army out and counting servers and trying to figure that out, which could be a nightmare. So asset management is key. Another little pro tip too, because I'm going to say power, the ability to manage power is great, but always get metered PDUs. That sets up DSIM like really easy to manage and monitor the power. So all of our PDUs were metered, and no matter what DSIM tool we use, we had it available. And then last thing is just temperature, just to keep them honest. And we have a profile of how many temperature probes and where they go on the front of the racks. So power, the ability to monitor the environmentals, and asset management are the three ones that I think are the most important to have.
And Al Nichols?
Yeah, and to make all that work, really disciplined, where are you on the maturity curve? And that's part of what's led to your model, Dave, I believe, is we've installed for so many clients where it's beautiful the day we leave, it's 98 or 99 point something %. And then they call us back for an audit. And we can make money on an audit, but I want to provide great value to our clients. And why do you have to do an audit if you got a system? Well, somebody did some patching in the middle of the night, they didn't keep it up. Once you start getting bad data in a system, people don't rely on it anymore, and it's not worth anything. So do you have the discipline, do you have the control of your data center to make sure that people are properly inputting it and going through a service like Dave offers, or do you have your organization under control enough that they will keep it up? If not, you got a snapshot and your data center is a moving picture. You've got to have an organization that will keep it up. If they do, it'll provide a whole. If I was a data center manager, I don't think I could sleep nights if I didn't know how the kind of data that provides. Like you were talking, John, on your power loading. What great data baseline you've got. If you've got the metered PDUs, you've got it in your system, you got it tracked over time, you know that you can look at the manufacturer spec and you can cut a huge percentage off of it, because even if you're getting middle of the night peak load from India or something, you know what your peaks are every hour of the day. You're not doing it with sneakers and you're not wasting manpower. You got the reports. So it enables you to really manage your data center a whole lot more tightly. But you got to be disciplined to keep it up, or you're wasting your time.
So I think the takeaway is that if you're planning to move to a colo, you should take your DSIM initiative very seriously, because you no longer can walk in and out like you could in your enterprise.
Right.
And you ought to weigh and work into the budget not only the cost of DSIM, but also the discipline to maintain it. I think, guys, we're at the end of our Q&A time. So let me just take the last couple of minutes, ask each of the panelists to just give some final thoughts, and then we'll go to our networking time. Let me start with John Robertson. Any final thoughts?
Just a final little pro tip that I really found value in, but it only applies if you're building out a new colo site. And what it is, like I said, I would always get a third-party remote hands vendor. So whenever you're building out a new site, invite the third-party remote hands vendor's staff to be there with you to help build the site out. That way they're going to learn your hardware, they're going to get comfortable with you, you're going to build trust, and then they know when it's into production and you put in a remote hands request, they're already familiar with it, so they're going to have that confidence. So that's my little pro tip with remote hands on a new site.
Great, thank you. Al?
Yeah, that's great advice, John. And we've seen it done, and we've seen it not done, and it works a whole lot better when it is done. And just on, just one I give is culture. You're going to be living with these colo folks. They're a part of your team, whether you like it or not. So it's not just price and facilities, but are these the kind of guys you can count on? Will they have the flexibility even if it's not written in, to give you the service they need. And hopefully they got the stability. I know John's been through, I guess, 3 regimes in one. Well, maybe different owners, but maybe the same people running it. I don't know. But these people are becoming part of your family. So hopefully they got the service attitude, and they're the kind of people you want to be doing business with long term. So I'd look at that. That you can't measure it in the numbers, but I think it's very important to a successful relationship also.
And John Parker.
Very quickly, I've already talked about 2 of my 3 big components. One is using a real estate broker. 2 is having a good, robust, reliable, decent tool. And number 3, I kind of talked about, but hire a very experienced professional mover when you move your data center, especially if you haven't done much data center moving to a colo. These guys, and like I said, I use Silverback, but there are others that are very good as well. These guys can tell you most of what you need to know on how to move your data center. So you can learn a lot, once again, by just listening and observing, but they can teach you a lot of things that you didn't even think about when it comes to moving your data center when you're interviewing and talking to them. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can do a real quick follow-up, yeah, if when you're talking to a relocation expert, if they can't tell you some things you didn't know and hadn't thought of that are significant, then they're probably not that good.
If you would like more information about our organization, most of you know we're www.socal7x24exchange.com. And we'll also have the slide deck from this presentation there, as well as the video recording. So, and if you would like to become a sponsor, we really would appreciate getting some new sponsors. We do have costs for the website and when we have regular meetings.